Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, 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 and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about being a deeply creative person or superficially creative person, however you like to think about it, but still a creative person who is sharing their work online, who wants to make some money from that effort, and who is trying to do that without relying on social media, or who is just so burnt out on the trials and tribulations of the internet that you have landed here at Off the Grid, hoping to do things differently and trying to find community and guidance and inspiration on that journey. Hopefully, hearing that makes you feel like you arrived in exactly the right place, and I am thrilled to have you here. So if we haven't met before, I am your host, Amelia Ruby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio, and on this show, I share stories, strategies, and experiments for sharing your work and making money online with radical generosity, energetic sovereignty, and no or minimal social media. Today is a very special episode of the show because I am joined by a person who may be my favorite creative business podcaster, other than me in this show, of course. But when I want to listen to somebody else's creative business podcast, this is the one that I go listen to. And that is Creative Pep Talk by Andy J. Pizza. I am so thrilled to have Andy on the show today to talk about how he makes money as an artist, as well as the strategic choices he's made to grow his podcast and the musician framework that he uses for thinking about how a creative business needs singles, albums, tours, and merch to be successful. It's a wonderful conversation, and I want to get right to it. So let's go ahead and dive in to my off-the-grid themed chat with Andy of Creative Pep Talk Podcast. Hi, Andy. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Hey, happy to be here.
I am thrilled to have you. As I'm sure our many listeners who press play on this episode, Creative Pep Talk is oft recommended in the interweb, in the clubhouse, in every space I run. Your show gets dropped in the links regularly. So
it was very nice to hear.
Yes, and it's really impressive that you're still making it over 500 episodes in.
I'm not slowing down. I feel like, if anything, I've ramped up, but I still love making it.
That's the gift, right? To be able to stay in the practice over time, which is one of the many things I want to talk to you about today. So you have had a 20-year career as an artist, as a creative. You've done so many cool things. You've collaborated with brands that everybody knows about, like Nickelodeon and Xbox and Apple. You've gotten to do stuff on Sesame Street. You've published so many amazing books. And I know that looking at your career from my perspective, it's like, wow, this is all so cool that somebody can actually do this. But also, I know, as someone who also works with artists, that all of that type of work is shifting. Last year, this year, a lot has changed. We're all dealing with different market forces, the rise of AI, all these things are impacting creatives and artists in every industry. So I kind of wanted to start with you today, just in the present moment, and ask you what your business looks like in 2026. What are the things that you're doing now, and how are you making money as an artist these days?
I've been asked this a few times, and usually I don't know the answer because I am very into the business of trying to succeed and trying to make sure I'm doing the kind of work that I want to be doing. But I'm not always good about knowing what the income streams are and how much they are and all that kind of thing. But you asked me at a good time because I just did my taxes. So I have
We're 6 days from tax deadline.
And the other piece of it that's kind of hard is that it changes all the time. So last year isn't necessarily indicative of what it was the year before and prior to that. But last year, I think books were the biggest part of my income, doing picture books, and clients were probably second. And then everything else fell underneath that. So podcasting, sponsors, and Patreon. And talks and we still get some from the classes that we did on Skillshare. But there were definitely years when Skillshare was number one, and there were years when podcast sponsors made a lot more money than they do now. If you're not in the podcasting space, this is kind of boring, but in 2022, podcasting hit a huge bubble in terms of sponsorships for all kinds of reasons, mainly just that we had all the investors just pouring tons and tons of money into something that could never get the returns they were looking for. These huge tech companies buying podcasts for billions of dollars and stuff like that. Like, it was a ridiculous time. And, it was kind of fun to be part of that a little bit in a tiny way prior to that. But then, 2022 and 2023, it just kind of, all the money just disappeared overnight. And then we've kind of rebuilt it since then. So now it's still a piece of what I do. But the other reason why I think that question is kind of difficult to answer, I guess it's not even just difficult to answer as much as it is not how I think about it. So I think about it much more like all of these things are interconnected in a way that's hard to pick apart. It's kind of like in the business world, what they call like a flywheel, like this thing leads to that thing, leads to that thing, leads to that thing. And so to me, I don't think of it as which is the most profitable as much as like what is the purpose of each of these things and how do they fit together. And I'm thinking about that a lot. Like, I even think about it like one of the things I had in mind as I started pursuing picture books more seriously was, okay, if I really make a big part of my business and my creative identity picture books, then what does that say about what kind of talks that I'm going to give? Even if I'm giving a talk to a corporate client, it might be more about storytelling because there's kind of a connection between those parts. So is that too much information? Not enough? Somewhere in between? Like, how'd I do?
That was great. You were thinking both like very specific and I think at like the higher level of how it all fits together, which I appreciate. And, I love that you start with like, it's so many different things and it changes every year, because I find that when I work with folks who have a clear art practice and they're really building their business as an artist, this is always a little obvious to them that they're doing a lot of different things, that it's always going to weave a lot together. But when I work with people who are sort of coming to it more from the online business space, they've been trained in this way of like one signature offer. Every piece of your work should hit like this, 5-6 figures of revenue. And like, it's such a different mentality. And I appreciate talking to artists who have made a living, have made a career like yourself for decades now, like doing this work and being very upfront about like, it's never just one thing. And even if it is one thing one year, it's not that one thing the next year. And so part of loving this work is loving, I think, like juggling a lot of different balls, having things up in the air.
Definitely. I actually think about it like this. Like, when I was a kid, if you had asked me like, what is my art form? What is my unique offer? Like, I wouldn't have had any idea, because at the time we were making fake Saturday Night Live videos and we were drawing tons of pictures, and I made like a fake radio show on my Talkboy. And so I was just doing all kinds of stuff. And then when I got to go to college, then they're like, you need to focus on one thing. What is the thing that you're going to do for the rest of your life? And so I picked design and illustration, and I was like, all right, I'll do it. Fine. It was hard to pick, but now I'm all in on this. And then now I can find myself in this place where I'm like, God, now I got to make videos and I got to do this podcast and all I want to do is make the art. And I'm like, hold on, that isn't true. Like, when you were a kid, this is what you wanted to do. You wanted to express your creativity in all these different ways. And then even beyond that, a podcast is basically a fake radio show on a Talkboy. That's basically what I do. And so I try to remember that I actually like having this diversification, not just of income, but of creativity, partially because it doesn't put too much pressure on any individual piece. When the podcast started taking off, it took the pressure off illustration. And that's when I started doing some of my favorite illustration I ever did to date, because I felt looser, and that led to some of the books that we've made. And it's just, I like having all of these different parts that are, to me, kind of all the same thing too. So for me, they are also all illustration. So illustration is like, my favorite definition of that is writing with pictures. And even when I'm writing with words, I'm still writing with pictures because I'm reaching for metaphors and symbols and analogies. I'm still looking for an image to kind of bring something to life. So for me, yeah, from the outside, it might look like, oh, he does all these different things. But on the inside, I'm always kind of trying to do the same thing, the thing that I like to do, which is illustrate something that I care about or that I want to say. And then, so there's the financial side, there's the creative side, and then there's the productivity side where after doing this for a long time, I realized like what most artists probably already know is that I can't really be super creative more than like 3 or 4 hours a day. That's the max amount of creativity that I have. And I don't really feel like doing more than that. And so I used to really fight things like email, and I still don't like email, but I do feel like, okay, a couple hours in the afternoon, that's really the best way I can spend my time because I can't really do much else anyway. And so I like having all these different outlets too, just in terms of not burning out on one particular type of creativity or sitting in the same chair or, just sitting in the same energy. Even, sorry, I'm going on a huge rant. This is something I think about so often. And another piece of it that I haven't quite figured out is I would love to have, like the podcast interviews give me a little bit of this, but I do feel like the entrepreneurial art game is incredibly lonely. And I definitely would not thrive in a regular office. Like I've done that before. It is really, really, really hard for me as an ADHD person. And so I don't think I could do that, but I do feel like, man, sometimes I feel like my social skills are just atrophying because I just can't. I just don't see that many different people that often because I'm doing my little creative rhythm, which is kind of, I say it very intentionally because I know for a lot of people that is the dream. And I just want to say like, there are elements of it that are not so great and that you're still going to have to problem solve things. And there are all kinds of other ways where I'm not living the dream. I'm not trying to make it out like my life's baller. It is not. There's tons of problem solving and juggling and struggling and all that crap too. And it's hard to keep it all going. But I just wanted to highlight that aspect of it. Like I would like to have some part of my life that is just a little bit more like, social, even though I'm pretty introverted.
I think that knowing yourself in those ways is actually a really important part of being self-employed, knowing what you need to thrive and then finding solutions to bring those things in. Because even for the introverted artists among us, like creativity requires outside sources, right? To inspire, to rub up against, to problem solve with and for. And without that, like you can't just live in like a friction-free bubble where you make art all day because I think you like run out of creative juice. It won't flow.
I think about a lot, like, I don't know if everyone feels like this. So I'm curious what you think, because this is something that I haven't really explored with anybody. But for me, when I look back over my life, I have very distinct kind of good eras and not so good eras. Do you feel like that?
I can see it. I don't know that I thought about it that way before now, but like when you're like, what's a bad era? I can come up with years. So
And maybe it's easier to do that even, maybe they're more memorable in a way. But I've been thinking about it recently because I've been in a little bit of a funk. I haven't been in a funk creatively. I feel like I've made some of my favorite stuff, but just kind of like socially, I think it's probably post-COVID and not just socially, but just mental health wise and everything. Like I think a lot of people have experienced that, not to mention just the state of the world. Like it's just been a lot. And I've tried to think about the parts of it that you accept and then the parts of it that you have some control over. And one aspect I've thought a lot about is what were the eras that felt great? It sounds kind of like Taylor Swift in a way. What were the seasons? And I think a big part of it for me was like having a clear idea of like, this is what I'm all about right now. And I'm surrounded by a handful of people that are on their own journey, but we're kind of in a similar vein and we're just really like sharpening each other and inspiring each other and challenging each other. And I just think, I think with the pandemic and then everything after that, it's just been a weird time. Anyway, it's kind of a massive digression, but it is a piece of the puzzle in terms of building a lifestyle that works for your brain.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what you described, like it sounds very simple perhaps, but it requires a lot of moving pieces to be in that place where you're like, this is what I'm all about right now. And I know other people who are actively all about something tangential or related or similar in a way that we can really grow and thrive together. You have to be clear about that. You have to know those other people. They have to be in the same place. And I think that I've definitely been in eras where that felt true, where I was like, oh, we're all building. And there's something so satisfying about like crescendoing with other people. It is like an orchestra. And then sometimes you're just like a random trombone player who's off key in the back and you're like, oh no, this feels really bad.
Yeah, or just like walking down the street with it and just annoying people. Like it feels like that sometimes. And maybe also that's not for everybody. I know there are other people that need to kind of go into really intense modes and have a really solitary focus. And maybe that'll last for a season and then they shift gears and do a different version of a project where they're all in on that thing. But for me, I need a really diverse grouping of things to make me feel good.
And I think, between us, we are both podcasters with creative practices. We obviously are blending some of these different modes together. And so, of course, like we'll feel similarly perhaps about that or attract people who feel that way. And also, like I always like to use an ecosystems approach to a business. And we all know that monocropping is bad for ecosystems. And I think that's true in a natural ecosystem or in a business ecosystem. Like if your business is only built on one thing, it cannot be very resilient. And so I often work with people to try to be like, okay, what else can we add in here? How can we take some pressure off, like you said before, or how can we, companion plant some things next to each other such that you have more resilience if something dries up or there's a literal drought or, the metaphor actually kind of works, I think, all the way down in those instances. I want to weave in something else that's like very popular in the topic of this podcast and talk a little bit more about social media as well as your podcast and like creative pep talk. And so, along the way of your career, you've built a large social media following. You've built this incredibly popular podcast. I'd love to hear a bit about how those came to be. And I don't know, like, did one come before the other? Were they both just things you were doing and trying out? What's like the origin story of those aspects of your work?
Yeah. So I think that one thing that is pretty different about me as a creative person is that I've always been showing up online throughout the entirety of my creative journey. It was Tumblr and Twitter back in the day, and even before that was Flickr. Like I was in that era of things. So I was always kind of showing up and connecting with people that were doing similar things and part of some kind of scene. I don't feel like my Instagram really got to a substantial size until after I was doing my podcast. But both of the podcast and the Instagram and then the other social media things that I've done, but especially those two, were very intentional things. They were intentional, they were goal-oriented, they were strategic. And the thing I was going to say was, I think that the typical way to think about creativity is that you start without knowing where you're going to go. And I've heard John Mayer calls this Ouija board creativity, where it's like the guitar is playing itself. The paintbrush has a mind of its own, like that kind of thing. You don't know, you start, you don't know where it's going. And that's the flying by the seat of your pants. And writers call it pantsing. I think that we mostly think that is the definition of creativity. Like that is what creativity is. Whereas I think it's just as creative, just a very different type of creativity to do strategy. And strategy is the opposite, which is not starting without knowing where you're going to go. It's starting with the end in mind. It's starting with, I want to go there. What's the step before that? What's the step before that? All the way until you get to where you're stood. And then you try to take those steps, right? And so I bring that up because both the podcast growth and the Instagram were both very intentional. And I could give you other examples. I'm not saying, the reason I'm bringing this up is not to say like, when I want something, I get it. Like, it's not like that. It's not like that at all. It's just that there are plenty of things that I've wanted and tried to do and had a strategy for, and it didn't work. Like, that's true. I've experienced that plenty of times. The reason I bring it up is just because I think it's so underrepresented in creative conversation. And I think it's so disempowering to feel as though you are at the mercy of what life does to you and what happens to you. And we, in the creative world, I like to think of it like most of the people that get interviewed, it's like if in the business world, they only interviewed lottery winners. And they said, how did you do it? And they're like, it was the secret, man. It was like, some kind of mystical thing that, and I see myself as a little bit of a mystical person. It's not, I'm not divorced from that. Spiritual practice has been important to me throughout my life. So I'm not even like hating on that. I'm just saying that the people that end up getting asked the most questions about how you did it are the most extreme cases. And almost every time someone's like, well, David Bowie did that. And you're like, okay, how is that going to help you? It's not. I can guarantee just by probability, you're not going to be David Bowie. So I say that because I think creative strategy is an incredible muscle to strengthen because it's about co-creating with life. That's what came to mind about building the podcast, building the Instagram, is that both of them were kind of separate things. And they were both things that were like, this is why I'm doing this. This is what I'm aiming for. And I'm going to figure out how does one do that? Like there was a time where I realized like, a lot of the jobs I want to get at this moment in time, I'm not going to get them if I don't have a larger Instagram. Now, I don't think that's true right now. So, I'll just say that. I don't really think your Instagram following is going to be a deal breaker for lots of opportunities. But I already had an Instagram by the time I started the podcast, but it wasn't very big or very successful. And it wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 years into the podcast that I started thinking a lot more seriously about it.
Yeah, I really like this point. One, because I'm also a very strategic thinker. And I think that something social media has really done to people's brains is like sort of fuck with that sense of like, well, anybody could be David Bowie now. Like it's, everybody knows somebody who's gone viral or knows somebody who like made it as an influencer. It brought a lot of that like seemingly closer to home, I think, for people.
Yeah, so true.
And it's been really harmful, I think. It has like eroded the sense that we can be strategic. And also, I think a lot of people are being very strategic, but they're attempting to strategize, like bargaining with the algorithm. That's what they think strategy is. I hear this a lot, right? It's like, well, my strategy is how do I get the algorithm to like me? And I don't think that really works because one, an algorithm is not like a sentient entity. It can't actually bargain with you. And two, at this stage, the only motivation of these platforms is to make their own profits. And so any success you have, like it's a byproduct of that. You can't count on it. And even if you do make a ton of money doing something on social media, the next time you try to do it, it won't work again. So like part of what I think about strategy is it can be like not always strictly repeatable, but you can iterate on it, you can learn from it. And I think social media just breaks all of that logic. It doesn't work anymore.
I think you're completely right. Like this feeling of at any second I could be David Bowie. Anybody could. It's scary even to the point where I'm not trying to be harsh on anybody, but you don't even have to have any talent or skill. I don't mean that in a harsh way. I mean, that's what it promises you. And that's dangerous because it's kind of like just because of who I am and what, and I'm very pro, like people have value without skills and talents. I'm very pro that. But I just think in a creative career, that's an odd thing. It actually keeps you from developing and trying to create something of value and interesting. And I feel so strongly about, especially TikTok and Instagram, that the only value for those platforms really is the casino, is the house. The house wins every time. And they are weaponizing this feeling of at any second my life could change. Why do you think they're making videos and they're having calls, real calls with creators one-on-one to coach them? Why? That's not generosity. It's because they're a TV channel that doesn't pay their creators. Like it's so sad to me because I know people that have went mega viral. I know people that have millions of followers. And guess what? It mostly didn't go well. It mostly didn't do anything for them other than, and this is the realistic part, and this is why I did build the Instagram. At the time, it was more meaningful. And even now, I'm glad that I have that following purely just because it is some level of social proof that helps me get my foot in the door in the opportunities that I want. And so it's not that it's completely meaningless. I think that some aspects of this new version of it are much more meaningless than they used to be.
Social media is the casino. They're the house. We are just pulling the slot machine all day long. And I also really like your point of, yes, of course, human beings have inherent worth. And also, if you're a creative person and you just want to be famous for being yourself, that's just a celebrity. That's
Right.
not actually an artist.
Right. It's a different thing.
It's a totally different thing. And if you want to be an influencer and try to make that work through the power of celebrity, move yourself to LA, network effectively, get good at social media, and maybe that can happen for you. But that's not a creative business. That's a different thing. And I think sometimes people mistake these logics as different, and they don't quite understand that even those business models are so different. Being an influencer is so different than being a creator. But this gets back to the strategic piece and the question I wanted to talk through more, which is how do we understand where we want to go and how do we understand the path to get there? So could you share some more specifics with an example from your work around how you charted that course?
Yeah. So I have lots and lots of examples of this. Usually the way that I go about doing it is a strategic side project. It's a body of work that kind of tells people I am who I say I am and I can do what I am asking to do. It's a portfolio. And the easiest example of this is the podcast. And so you can see how there was strategy baked into the podcast from day one that was pretty unique to serve the goals that I had. So when I made the podcast, I always like to say this first, because if you're not ADHD, you might not I take this for granted. So there's two things that have to be true for me to want something. First thing has to be, it's just intrinsically interesting to me. It's just, I'm curious about it. I like spending time on that. It's just an authentic expression of something I want to do. The second thing, which maybe I don't know if this is an ADHD thing or if it's just a human thing. I actually think ADHD people really do love helping people. I think there's a couple reasons why. I think one is because it's easier than doing stuff yourself because you have executive dysfunction. So you have all these answers, but you can't put them into practice super easily. And so it's really fun there's nothing more fun. I love coaching people for that reason, to be like, hey, maybe you should do this, this, and this. And then they go do it and succeed. And it's that's awesome. It's just very fun. And so I think I've got a lot of dopamine from helping people. So two things always have to be true. I have to feel like this is something I just want to do. And I feel like this is good for people. This is good for me and good for other people for me to do this. And also the thing about that is that's getting my whole self on board. I'm a nerd for Jungian thought. And I like this idea of that gets my ego on board of this is something that's really cool to me. And it gets my deeper self that's much more connected to the whole and to the community and that kind of thing. So when I did the podcast, it felt like I had done a talk that had hit that Venn diagram perfectly. I'd done some talks that hadn't gone super well in random scenarios for a whole bunch of reasons. And then I'd done this one talk that was much more story driven. And I was it was just a little community talk. And I just felt this feels like something I want to do for the rest of my life. I completely fell in love with it. And sometimes you have that moment where you're I feel like my life has changed. And then you check with your partner and they're has it though? I don't know. And that's a good indicator, right? That's a good way to check the temperature. And she was at that talk, my wife and Sophie, and I asked her, I was I think that was kind of something. And she was I think it was something. I've never seen that before. I've never seen you in that zone. That was really cool. And I was a little bit tempted to be maybe I should just go. I was already an illustrator. I was already, I think, full-time at that moment. And there was a little temptation to be let's just go straight into talks. Let's go hard into that. But I had kids and had already built some of this stuff and loved that stuff too. And so I thought, okay, is there a way to like combine these two things, like storytelling and doing these talks with doing illustration? It wasn't until later that I was watching some like TED Talk or something, and they were like, hey, I want to give you a story to kind of bring this to life. Here's my illustration. And I was like, it's the same thing. They're both illustration. And so that didn't come until later. But I did that talk. I wanted to get more talks. I knew like I want to do more of this. So I knew what I wanted. And I thought, okay, I want to be the person that gets booked on the design conferences and gets brought into the corporate creative teams and does talks there. So I knew what I wanted. That was my end point that I had to work my way back from. And then you say, what would the client be or the conference that I would speak at before that? And then before that, and then before that, maybe go back 10 steps even. And then what would I need to build to cold call that first one? And that's a project. And so my project was the podcast. And the reason why you can see the strategy in it from day one is I started this podcast in 2014 and I made it for the first 50 episodes. It was completely solo. It was just literally me talking. Eventually I started doing some interviews, but it's remained primarily a solo podcast throughout its entire decade plus existence. And the reason was because I was building a portfolio of talks so that I could send that to one of these conferences or someone would discover it at one of those conferences. And that's exactly what happened. And so that's an example. But the same thing happened for me in picture books. The same thing happened to me with editorial. The same thing has happened to me in all these different spheres. They almost all have happened that way. Sometimes I feel annoyed that so much of my career has had to be me making stuff happen. Like I would love for something just random to happen and that it was great. I've been lucky in all kinds of ways, but I'd love to be lucky in that kind of way. But I also like that my story that I tell myself around that is if I did get lucky in all these different ways, then I wouldn't be able to tell anybody else how to do it. And I have got lucky. I'm not saying I haven't. But yeah, a lot of the bigger things that have happened have been strategy.
Thank you for laying all of that out for us. And I also just love that you knew what you wanted to do, which was speak at these major design conferences, be the person that, big firms, companies invite in to speak about creativity. So you started this side project, the podcast, and you would just use it as a talk reel, essentially. Like, here I am 50 times in a row. Which talk do you want? I have all these options for you.
Exactly.
And also, like, that helped you book talks, but then the podcast became its own thing, right? Like, now it's a whole arm of your business. It's obviously not just a way for you to get speaking gigs anymore. And that's something I've seen time and time again as well, is like, everything I'm doing now came out of these, random side quests of my life, DJing at a community radio station, and they taught me how to podcast, and that got me freelance work, and that led me to my studio, and that led me here, right? Like, for me personally, sometimes the strategy is more obvious in hindsight than it was when I was starting out.
Right. Yeah, sure.
But I think as you get more experience in your career, you know more of the moving pieces, and you're able to be much more intentional. I'm also curious, something that's really happened for me a lot, and I'm curious if this has been the case for you, is like, in being strategic, I have had to very consciously shed a lot of the sort of false promises of things I thought I wanted that didn't turn out that way. For instance, like my first book deal didn't live up to what I thought I was going after or something like that, right? I know it truly never does. Book deals are so fraught.
Book deals are, yeah. It's a complicated world for sure.
And it's always a reckoning. I don't know anyone who's published their first book traditionally that didn't have like a complete creative reckoning in the process.
Yeah, that's true.
So that to me is always like a paradigmatic example. But do you feel like when you have worked toward a goal, it's typically just been like self-authored? Or have you found yourself chasing things that you're like, this is what people told me to do, or this is what I thought I was supposed to do, and then I had to figure out that's not actually it for me?
100%. So all of these projects haven't worked out. Okay.
Yeah, true.
And one example of that is I remember earlier in my career, I was looking around at trying to figure out like what kind of jobs I could do that would feel right and be kind of a good fit. And I remember seeing illustrator friends of mine or people on the internet who had in their portfolio these book cover illustrations that just looked amazing. And I just thought, this looks so freaking cool. Like, I would love to do that, right? And I came up with a project where I was going to make a handful of books from the public domain and recreate the cover. At the time, this was a little bit more unique than it is now. This is something that happens all the time now. It wasn't completely an original idea, but it was a little bit more novel than it is now. No pun intended, novel. But the extra layer I was going to do was we were going to screen print them as posters. And so I did Wizard of Oz, and I did 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and then I did Moby Dick. And I remember posting about it and someone saying, "Oh, this is great. How'd you like the book?" And I was, I was like, "Oh, I'm supposed to read these books." I was in my early 20s, maybe mid 20s.
Still, I skimmed the Wikipedia page. I got the gist.
I just didn't really think that much about that side of it for some reason. And that, to me, as I like to make fun of myself with that project, but also I like to use it as an example to say, doing the thing is the best way to know, not thinking about the thing. Yes, that's something I should have known before I started it. At the time, I wasn't reading any classic books. I wasn't really reading hardly any fiction, almost exclusively nonfiction. Nowadays, I'm more into fiction and even classic books than I was then. So I could probably do that project more authentically now. But I didn't know that until I had done it, And so for me, those side quests are always valuable because they do get at what you're saying. Sometimes these things are just an ego trip. They're just that looks amazing. And it's similar to the celebrity or the fame or whatever. So many people have had to learn that the hard way of ooh, all this attention is not so good. But doing those projects are some of the best way to make progress. I've talked about it on the show. I've seen this meme about how to put in a USB stick. And you put it in once and it's the wrong way. And then you put it in the other way and you're like, no, that's actually the wrong way. And then you put it in the right way. And that's what creative stuff is like. It's much easier to just try things and realize and here's the reason, Stephen Pressfield talks about, you're always going to feel resistance. And almost the only way you're going to know which resistance is truly the wrong resistance is by doing it the right way and the wrong way. And so I feel like lots of the projects have been wrong, but the best way to figure that out is to actually test it.
Yeah, I often find that I have a ton of clever ideas. So many clever ideas. I mean, as strategists, all we have is clever ideas sometimes. And it has taken me years of just trying to do the clever thing to realize not all these have legs. Not all these are for me. But if I didn't try them, I wouldn't know that. If I didn't go down those paths, I wouldn't be able to really feel into now my very honed sense of oh, this is the true thing or the real thing, or this feels right. And no one outside of you can tell you if it feels right or not. That's such an important part of developing a creative practice. I want to stay on this theme of projects and weave social media back in because you recorded a podcast episode last summer about creative people leaving social media, because you and I both know that last year, everybody decided they wanted to leave social media. There was all of this buzz around it. And people might have expected me to be hell yeah, we're all leaving social media. But I am a strategic thinker. And I'm also I always want people to do it intentionally. I want to make sure it's the right fit for you and your business. And I loved your episode because I felt like it really grounded us in how do you make this decision? And you provided a framework for leaving social media, kind of follows the musician model of singles, albums, and tours with merch. And I had never heard anybody talk about this before. So I'm curious, could you kind of explain that to Off the Grid listeners and walk us through that framework?
So at the time I was listening to your podcast and Cody Cook Parrott's podcast and also just feeling, and the reason I was seeking that stuff out was because I was feeling not just the burnout of social media and doom scrolling and all that. I was feeling all that, but I was also realizing I've been taught to believe this is important for my creative career. People's billion-dollar businesses rely on people like us believing that we need to be creating for exposure for them for free. And I was starting to realize this isn't really serving my creative goals like it used to. And I wanted to think about it a little bit differently. And so I was kind of exploring. I took lots of breaks from social media and tried different things. But ultimately, it got me thinking about what are my actual creative goals and what are my creative business goals and what are the things that I need to be doing. And one thing I'll just say, like when I first started as an illustrator, I had some lucky breaks early on. And then it all disappeared. Like it just, we were in the recession. This was like back in 2008, 2009. And I started building some momentum, got a few lucky breaks, and then it was just kind of disappeared overnight and then didn't get any work for 6 to 8 months or something. And it just all kind of disappeared. And I often joke that my rock bottom wasn't like drugs and alcohol, but it was business books and marketing podcasts.
I mean, a funnel will only take you to rock bottom.
Yes, exactly. It's the funnel. It's pretty dicey stuff. But, I'm grateful for that time because I learned a lot of things that I think are important, are not. Some of it is not compatible with creativity, or you can get sucked into that and lose your creativity. But there are elements of it that I think are just really, really important. And one element of it is kind of the funnel or the customer journey, which is something that we have an intuitive sense of, but we don't really fully maybe know what that means. I think if you would ask most artists and you got them to think about when it comes to like selling my work or connecting with other people, what are the steps of that? I think I would have thought there were two things. It was, you have to be discovered, you have to get on their radar, and then you have to sell the painting or sell the work. And one of the things that I learned in the marketing side of things that I saw in the music industry is that they have a more complete version of that process of how someone goes from not knowing you exist to being a casual consumer to being someone who is supporting you and being a true fan in that way. And so I think of it as like the journey of the true fan. And there's these 3 pieces. And so it's not just discovery and then sale. Like there's this really big middle part because you do want to get discovered. And how musicians do that is they have these singles and they have these collabs. They open for other bands, but they have singles and the point of the single is to be discovered. But the fact of the matter is, just because you like a song on the radio doesn't mean you're going to the tour or buying the merch, right? Like, what is the thing in between those 2 events? It's the album, is that you hear the single. If you really, really like it, then you're going to go check it out and you're going to go deeper. And that going deeper is developing a sense of trust in a relationship with that artist. So there's these 3 parts. There is the single, which is the discovery. There's the album, which is the developing of the trust and becoming like a fan. And then there's the 3rd part, which is the way that you support them, which, nowadays is tour and merch for musicians. And so I like this because this is something that the music industry built this infrastructure around music. And it's not perfect, but I do think that we can learn a lot from it. And so to me, where I landed after exploring all these different ways of having a creative career without social media or with social media or all that stuff, I thought, this is kind of the wrong question. It's not really the thing. It's not yes or no. I have to have a solution for what are my singles, what are my albums, what is my tour and merch. I have to have something for those 3 things. I have to get people to know about me. I have to get people to be able to go deep with me. And then I have to have something that is that people are buying. And musicians have had to change that too, because it used to be people were buying the music. And now they're not buying the music, or that now they are again. But there was a period of time where they weren't, and you had to sell t-shirts. And like I've heard Boy Genius talk about like feeling like they're just a t-shirt commercial. And yeah, okay, I get that. And it's kind of, it's funny and sad and everything. But as practice, those are the pieces that you need. And I try to be not super precious about them. Like there were times where my podcast was the discovery engine. And then there was a time where like people weren't outwardly focused on finding new podcasts. And that wasn't so much the case. And it was more so the album. It was how people were going deep with me. And I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is that there is that middle piece. It's the most ignored. Most people are thinking about how do I get discovered, and then I'll make up the rest later. Oh, if I go viral, then I'll figure out how to monetize it. So at best, they're thinking about how to get discovered, and then what am I going to sell? Almost no one thinks about, do I have ways where people can get into the deep cuts and actually make that transition from being a casual appreciator to someone who knows your name? This is another crappy thing about social media, but it's similar to the radio, where it's like, if I said, hey, what's the song you've enjoyed the most lately? You might, if you exclusively listen to the radio, you might not know what they're called. You might not even know the name of the song. And the same is true for art. If I said, what illustration like lit you up the most recently, you'd probably be like, I can't even find it because I don't know their name. I just saw it on Instagram or saw it on Pinterest or whatever. And so if you're trying to build a practice as either as a business or as a kind of community, you have to make the relationship, that middle piece, is super, super essential. And the only way it gets done is a long form sort of thing. And that was another piece of wanting to do talks. Early on, I realized like, oh, the only way I could imagine sustaining my illustration career was getting ad jobs frequently. They were the only ones that had the kind of margins that I could see like this working. And I saw all of them go to people that are doing talks. And I couldn't know if it was like a chicken or an egg thing, but I was like, I do think I need to get on stages. And that seems to be a big part of how you develop a bigger presence in the industry. And at the time I knew talks, but I didn't realize like, oh, that's just a long form piece of content. It is someone spending an hour with you. And so no matter how it could be a newsletter, it could be a podcast, it could be a talk, it could be a book. Like for me, books have been a big part of that. Like being published is a part of building trust for me. And that's one of the silver linings of if your first book didn't go as well as you wanted it to go, just having a book, whether it's published or self-published, even just having that as an accomplishment and as a statement and allowing people to go deep with you, that is that middle piece. And it's really essential. And there's not really any other way to do it.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you're emphasizing these like 3 points. Often I'll think of it as a sort of marketing framework, like grow, nurture, sell. Like we do need all of them. It's so interesting too, like the people you work with, you're really seeing like they can grow and then maybe they can sell, but they're never nurturing. And I often find with people who make their way into my world, they might only be nurturing. Like I encounter a lot of people who have an email list of like 200 people that they have been dedicatedly talking to for years. Yeah. And they're like, it's going to be a business one day, Amelia. And I'm like, well, gotta have some offers.
I know those
there.
people too. Yeah, now that you say that, that's true. It's not really maybe my nature, but I definitely see that. Yeah, there are a lot of people that are dedicated to like authenticity and doing it right and are all in for the right reasons. And yeah, I could totally see that.
Yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with like, it's about like our personalities. It's about our like core wounds and what we're afraid of. It's about, are we afraid of visibility? Are we afraid of making the sale? Are we afraid there's so many different places we find our comfort zone and often we stay there. But I completely agree with you. Like it's never going to be a business without all 3 pieces. Like you can make music and play in bars forever, but if you don't have singles, albums, and tours, you're not going to make a living from your music. And so I often think that's an important thing to distinguish too when we talk about like creative strategy. Like, is that what you want? And I often ask people when I'm working with them, like, is the goal here that this is a business that supports you full time? Because if it is, we need to function differently than if this is just actually something you want to do for creative fulfillment. It doesn't really matter if it makes money. It's a hobby. It's whatever. Like those are different ways of operating once again. But I like this framework a lot and it's helping me rethink my work. Like even if I just chart for Off the Grid listeners, like my first single was my list of 100 ways to share your work and life off social media. That was the first thing I made that got seen by like over 25,000 people. It got shared in all sorts of spaces I never even knew it got shared in. It got translated into other languages and published in other things. Like that was a big single for me. And then Off the Grid became my album. And now, it's an album with like 150 tracks. Your podcast is an album with 550 tracks. Yeah. Lots of deep cuts there. Yeah. And I'm sure people say to you what they say to me, which is like, I've been binging your show. I've been listening to so much of the back catalog. Like people find it and they just go deeper and deeper and deeper. They travel with you. And then there's the tour. For me, that's going to be my membership, the interweb. And then also there's the meet and greet, which is the group program I run inside the membership that you only know about if you're in there and you're a VIP and you sign up for it, right? So we build these like different layers, but I think it can all track very nicely onto that musician model. And then sometimes, yeah, there is the t-shirt. And the t-shirt is where like your super fan carries you into the world and other people can see you.
And that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
That ends up being that another business thing, the flywheel of now that t-shirt becomes the way that someone else discovers it. And it just kind of has this. And I think it also is important to kind of highlight this accounts for the idea of churn, where I know that if someone listens to like 50 episodes of my show, maybe even 100 or 200, they might be like super fan and they might be in the super fandom for a few years or 10 years or whatever. But a lot of people are going to eventually be like, okay, I got that. I don't need that anymore. And that's the same thing happens with music. Like as a musician, you might not want to feel like that. But as a music consumer, you definitely feel like that. You have eras where this was everything for me. And for some reason, it doesn't really do it for me anymore. Or they went on a different path and, whatever. And there are probably a handful of bands that you're going to follow for the rest of your life. But those are the exception to the rule. But that's the other thing I like about this is that kind of accounts for you don't need to have people in your world for the rest of their life. And it's okay to feel like, if this is hitting you at this time, then that's great. I think the other thing I just wanted to mention with that was there's a huge spectrum of creativity for yourself that's kind of like a diary, all the way to being a full-time artist. There's there's everything in between there. And even like, I don't feel like it's a perfect definition, but creative researchers often use the definition of creativity being something creative is both novel and useful. Now, I think there are pros and cons to thinking about creativity that way, but it can be new to you and useful to you, meaning it did something for you. It helped you process something, whatever, like that's creative and that's great in its own right. I think that there are a lot of people that maybe never want to go full time, but they still want part of the creative impulse is coming from being a social animal and wanting to connect with other people and have conversations about it and be seen by other people and show their audience themselves and all that kind of thing. And I think anytime it goes beyond the journal thing, you need the singles, albums, and tour.
Yeah, I think that's a nice point. You can like move into that sharing without it needing to be like a full-time business or even a business.
Even a business, yeah. Maybe you don't, maybe the tour is the only piece that's not necessary there if you really don't want to sell it. But there's an exchange there that goes beyond, yes, it's been kind of soiled by the economics and capitalism and all that in some way, but there is an exchange of energy and value and resources that goes beyond like just making money. But it's not for everybody. I'm not saying it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I know that you have a book coming out soon, and I was trying to figure out what book this is of yours, and I couldn't count. I don't know if you've counted.
I've tried to, but I've done so many different kinds of books. I always feel like I don't even know if this number is relevant. I've done over 10 books, but there's a lot of different kinds of books.
Yeah, it's like asking how many kids you have and then deciding if you count your pets. And you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely count my pets on that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I think we should. But could you tell us about Mysterious Things? What is this new book of yours? When does it come out? Where can folks get it?
Yeah, it's right here.
Ooh, exciting.
Mysterious Things. And if you're listening just audio, you won't be able to see it, but it's a follow-up companion to a book that my wife and I, Sophie Miller, did called Invisible Things 3 years ago. And it is about mystery. It's about trying to switch on brains to curiosity. I think at the heart of this, we don't say that it's about the knowledge paradox, but it is about the knowledge paradox because it is a picture book. But the knowledge paradox is, as we learn more and more and more, you would assume that at some point, mystery is going to be extinct. Like we're going to know everything. And the knowledge paradox is the more that we know, the more we realize we don't know. And that in some ways, the universe has never been more mysterious. And the reason why that's really been at the core of the Invisible Things project as a whole, and then very specifically this book in that project, Mysterious Things, because I think that as a kid, I felt like Truman from The Truman Show in this very particular way, where he wants to be an explorer. And if you're not familiar with that movie, it's supposed to be a young Jim Carrey in a classroom, and he's in this movie set or TV set, and he doesn't know it, and everybody's filming him, and they're trying to get him to not go anywhere because he can't actually leave this set. And so the teacher's like, actually, we've explored everything. You don't actually need to explore anything. And I felt like that as a kid. I really did. I felt like it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just the way that we went to school. It made me feel like, okay, look, all the juicy stuff has already been discovered before you got here. We put it in all these books, and for the next 12 years, you're going to get up to speed, and then you can go get on with, making value for shareholders. Like that.
Yeah, okay. That's what we're told.
So, but it wasn't so I was so checked out from learning. And I didn't become a lifelong learner until school was almost over. And it wasn't until I started getting into, popular quantum physics discussions and trippy conversations you have in college and all that kind of stuff. I started being like, oh my gosh, like we live in the most incredible and mysterious universe. And it just gets weirder all the time. All the time we're learning something that just seems completely impossible. And so much of our world, we don't even even our technology, we don't know why it works. There's a lot of things in the quantum realm and stuff that they're creating these microchips that they know work in theory, but they're like, we don't really know exactly why they work. And so the more we know, the more we realize we don't know. And there was physicists 100 plus years ago that felt like we only got 1% left to figure out. Like we pretty much nailed it. And then 30 years later after that, the physicists are like, we don't even know if we know 1%. We are so limited. And so that to me was wanting to give this book to younger me and be like, look, the universe is crazy. You don't even need to understand it. But it felt like school often felt like learning to play the guitar, but I'd never heard music before. And I'm like, why am I doing this? What is this? Why do I care about this? Even math, which I feel like I might have the dyslexic equivalent to numbers. I'm not sure, but I definitely struggle with numbers. But even math now, I'm way more friendly with math. And there's a character called Math in this book. I'm way friendlier with math because I'm like, this is the code of the universe. This is this mystical, weird, amazing thing. And so that it's both I always try to make my books kind of like an art book. So they're it's a collection of some of my favorite paintings in a way. And so for adults, I know a lot of adults bought Invisible Things, and I make it for that reason. It ended up in a lot of the art galleries and gift shops, which is kind of a dream of mine. I love that vibe. And then for kids, it's I just want to be like, hey kids, I don't know if anyone's told you this, but learning is how you dig into the juicy mysteries of being alive. And it's really cool. And there's just as interesting things here as there are, maybe more so than what is in the screen that you're looking at or what have you. So that's the book. I kind of went overboard telling you about it, but it's just because I'm excited about it.
No, I love this.
Yeah.
I feel like we talked about plenty of mysterious things today, like marketing and the internet.
Yes.
And also, I love seeing dark matter and math on the cover. And I'm with you. I feel like once you start learning anything about quantum physics, it will crack your brain open to how much is unknown, and even understanding that the two most popular theories of physics that we have conflict and make no sense together, even though they both are evident when you look around the world. And so I love that this is a children's book about the knowledge paradox. And of course, it's beautifully illustrated and such a wonderful object, in addition to being full of wisdom. So I know it comes out July 14th. Folks can get it anywhere they get their books. Do you have preferred retailers, or do you do signed copies or anything like that?
Yeah, if you go to invisiblethings.co, there's a list of the retailers, the classic ones. And then also, if you order it from Birdie Books, which is my local bookshop that is across the road from this studio, we're going to go sign all of those. So if you want a signed copy, you can do pre-orders from there.
Perfect. All right. That will all be linked in the show notes. Folks, pre-order the book. We're all authors here. Well, we're not all authors. There's enough authors here that pre-orders matter.
Yeah,
so.
they do. Yeah, they
Please
do.
get the book. I'm excited to get my nephew plenty of copies. And is there anything else you wanted to say or share with Off the Grid listeners today, Andy?
I don't think so. This was a complete blast. Thank you for having me. This was a bunch of stuff that I don't always get to talk about, and it was just tons of fun exploring this with you.
Thanks so much for being here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And until next time, we will see you off the grid.
I kinda hate social media, feeds on my brain like a bacteria. If you read my Wikipedia, it'll say I kinda hate social media. Post a picture of myself, sacrifice my mental health, use your product, time to sell. I would rather go to hell. Do you like this? Leave a comment. Can you share this? Will you wear this? Do you like this? Leave a comment. Can you share this? Will you wear this? Okay.
That was an abridged version of Social Media by Surfer Boy and Rectangle. To hear the entire song, find Surfer Boy on Spotify or head to the link in the show notes. Thanks so much to them for sharing the song with us, as well as to Melissa Caitlin Carter, who sings our theme song that you hear at the start of every show. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and if you enjoyed this episode, I hope you will download the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. Until next time, I will see you off the grid.